All right. Hello, everyone. I'm so glad that you could join us today. My name is Dr. Brittany McLeod. I'm the Associate Director in the Office of Undergraduate Research and Major Awards, and we are fortunate to be joined by Dr. Leigh Leasure in the Department of Psychology. She's going to be discussing with you all how to develop a strong research proposal. What are the elements of a research proposal? And you are all asked to come into this call with a research idea in mind, whether you're thinking about applying to an internal award like a PERS for the spring semester, or perhaps something external outside the University of Houston. We hope that you'll leave this conversation with something tangible that you can continue working on. And so without further ado, I will go ahead and turn things over.
Thank you, Dr. McLeod. Hello, everyone. I'm excited to share my experience writing research proposals with you. As Dr. McLeod said, I'm in the psychology department, so I do research, and I have submitted a lot of proposals in my career, and I've also helped a number of students construct PERS and SURF proposals. And so what I'm going to try and do today is I'm going to try and cover all bases. I'm going to share with you the elements that you would want to include in any research proposal, regardless of who the funding agency is, whether it's an internal award at U of H or whether it's some sort of bigger external award like, maybe a Goldwater or something. So we'll go through the basic elements of a research proposal, but I am going to put a special focus on PERS because the deadline for that is coming up, and I suspect that a lot of you are looking ahead and thinking about maybe submitting a proposal for that program. So we will have a little focus on PERS. And throughout this whole presentation, I'm going to leave some breaks where you can jot down some ideas as you're going through this presentation with me. I also want to let you know that since I'm having to teach remotely this semester, I'm kind of getting used to presenting and trying to maintain attention to a chat at the same time. So I'm going to try and do this today. So if, as we're going through this, you want to put questions in the chat, I will do my best to keep up with those as we're going along. I also want to let you know that it is my intent to leave a good amount of time at the end of this that you can ask questions. All right, so I am going to share my screen, and I always keep my fingers crossed that it works. Okay, so I think you can share my screen, and I'm going to trust that someone will tell me if you cannot. And I'm going to maintain some attention to the chat down here as well. Okay, so the title of this session is Drafting a Research Proposal. I kind of switched that up a little bit, and I'm going to call it Crafting a Research Proposal, because constructing a research proposal is something that takes time, and it takes a skill set that you will develop. And so I think of it actually as a craft. And in the research field, we actually call it grantsmanship. So it's a set of skills that is very learnable, especially with experience. And what it's really all about is constructing a research proposal that is both convincing and compelling. And so by convincing, I mean that your goal is to convince the funding agency that they should fund your proposal. And part of doing that is convincing them that you know what you're talking about, you are versed in the relevant literature, you are able to perform the techniques that you are going to need to be able to do to actually complete your research project. And you also need to make this compelling. So you need to convince them that this is a project that's worthy of funding. It's going to produce some kind of deliverable. It's going to further knowledge in whatever field it is that you are in. Okay, so before you begin crafting, I think two things are very important here. Know your literature. And so what I mean by know your literature, I don't mean the great works of literature in a particular language. In this context, literature is referring to what has been previously shown in your field. So I'm in behavioral neuroscience. And so for me, the behavioral neuroscience literature is all of the previous research that's been done on whatever project I'm intending to move forward with. So during this presentation, I'm actually going to show you a proposal that was written by a current PERS student of mine. His name is Pierce Popson, and he has given me permission to share his proposal with you. But you'll be able to see what I mean by, okay, here's the research that we intend to do. Here's what's already known. And here's how what we intend to do will build on what is already known. And so that's what I mean by knowing your literature. It's as simple as saying, you're not going into this blind. You know what's already been done so that A, you're not going to duplicate something that's already been done, and B, you've taken into account what is already known and you are using it to inform your own research proposal. The other thing that you should do before you start crafting is have a mentor. So you are students, you are learning how to do research, and so you're going to need guidance from someone who's already established in the doing of research. And so that's what I mean by a mentor. And so a mentor is someone who's going to bounce ideas off you and let you bounce ideas off them. It's someone who is going to help you through your project, maybe even train you in the techniques that you're going to need to know. And so this is someone that you're going to be working fairly closely with, because doing a research project is a lot of work. And when you're first learning how to do it, you're going to need some guidance. And so having a mentor is absolutely essential. Okay, so let's get into the basic elements of any research proposal. First of all, we're going to start with what I'm calling background, and this feeds into what I was saying about the literature. You are going to want to show your funding agency that you know what has already been done around the question that you are asking. The second part is the methods that you're planning to use. So what exactly are you going to be doing in this project? Are you going to be, like if you're in my lab, are you going to be running rats? And then are you going to be looking at their brain tissue? If you are in the history department, are you going to be combing through archives trying to answer a particular question? So what exactly are you going to do in order to be able to carry out your research? And then the third part of this is expected results or alternative outcomes. And this is something that it is really good to show your funding agency that you have thought through. So you want to show them that you have a set of expected results. You think you know what's going to happen. Even better than that, though, is to show that you have thought through what it will mean if you don't find what you think you are going to find. And so this is what are called alternative outcomes. And so even though when you're writing a research proposal, you don't yet have any results, you're going to tell your funding agency what you think you're going to find, what it will mean if you find what you think you're going to find, and what it will mean if you don't. So I see a question in the chat from Paula Velasco, and she's asking, I'm already in PERS, and one of my concerns was that I cannot change my research proposal after it has already been accepted. Well, Dr. McLeod's going to take that. Okay, cool, thank you. I will say though, this happens, right? No matter who you're applying to, you get funding and then something happens, like maybe COVID-19, and you totally have to change everything. It's okay. All right, so I said that I would focus on PERS, and so I wanted to actually have a look with you all at exactly what is involved in a PERS proposal. And so this is a screenshot from the PERS proposal site. And so what they're asking for here in a 500-word limit, which is not a lot, but it's okay. Trust me, it can be done. They're explaining that this has to be done in collaboration with a faculty sponsor. So again, this is about having a mentor, someone who's going to guide you in your research. So you want to, for this PERS proposal, discuss the relative importance of the proposed research within its discipline, state the specific tasks to be accomplished, and define your scope and your goals. And so they're essentially asking you for three main things. They want you to tell them the importance of what you're doing, what tasks you are going to perform, and then hidden under the pictures here are the goals of your research. So getting back to any research proposal, not just PERS, but any research proposal, as part of the background, these are the elements of the background. Why are you going to conduct this study? Another way of asking that question is actually, what gap in knowledge is your study intended to fill? What is your research question? And what is your hypothesis, or what are your hypotheses? For PERS, I've kind of put the PERS specific questions in the context of background. So when PERS is asking you, what is the importance of the study that you intend to do, and what are your goals? This corresponds to this background information. So as you are explaining why you're going to conduct the study, you are going to be covering what the importance of it is. And when you get into your research question and your hypothesis, this is going to essentially be explaining the scope and goals of the proposed research. So this is basically a set of facts that Pierce Popson, my PERS student, there's a lot of P's in that, Pierce Popson, my current PERS student, was working with when he was constructing his PERS proposal back before COVID, which seems like a million years ago. My lab is basically engaged in looking at the effects of exercise on the brain. And so Pierce was interested in stress because he's interested in substance use disorders. And stress is a major player in terms of people getting into the addiction cycle. And so Pierce was interested in doing something in my lab around stress. And so we had a pre-existing study that was looking at the fact that psychological stress decreases brain health by increasing inflammation. So this is something that was already known before we started this project, okay? It's been well established that a stressed out brain is an inflamed brain. When you're looking at brain inflammation, one of the ways that you can quantify it is by counting what are called microglial cells. So microglial cells are a type of brain cell. And when there is a situation of inflammation, they take on a certain shape and a certain look. And so basically, Pierce was working with the basic idea that a stressed brain is an inflamed brain, and that you can measure that by looking and counting the number of microglial cells that have a very distinctive shape. And so they have a big cell body and thick processes. And so here he's got some background on psychological stress and brain health, and some background on what inflammation actually looks like in the brain and how you can quantify it. And then it's also known, before we even did this study, it's been well established that exercise promotes brain health. And it does that in a lot of ways, but relevant to inflammation, it does that by decreasing inflammation and decreasing primed microglia. And so what we don't know yet, and the reason Pierce wrote his PERS proposal, was that we don't know whether exercise can protect the brain from stress-induced inflammation. And so Pierce's research question is, does exercise prior to a stressful experience limit brain inflammation? His hypothesis, given that exercise is known to promote brain health, is that exercise prior to stress will prevent microglial priming. So he's got his research question laid out, and he's got what he thinks will happen laid out. So at this point, I'm going to pause, and if you are thinking about putting in a PERS proposal and you've been working on it, or maybe even if you haven't, I'm going to take a couple of minutes and I'm going to let you have some time to jot down what's the basic information that you're working with for your research proposal. Just jot down some basic facts that are already known that you can use to build a research question and a hypothesis. So take about 2 or 3 minutes to do that, and then we will move on to methods. Okay, so I don't want to leave too long to do that because I don't want to give you the impression that you can construct a research proposal in under an hour. But I did want to give you a chance to jot down some things that might be relevant to what you're working on. Let's talk methods. The methods that, or the components of a method section that I have written here are kind of specific to STEM fields that are experimental. You would still need a method section even if you are not in a STEM field. It's just not going to be so heavy into the methodology and the apparatus. It's going to be more about broad strokes, right? So for STEM fields where we're going to be conducting some kind of experiment, your funding agency is going to want to know what your experimental design is. And so this basically means what groups, what are your experimental groups going to be? And how many subjects will you have per group? This is a good thing to consider when you're constructing a research proposal because you want to make sure that you are proposing to do something that's manageable in terms of your skill set and also the amount of time in which you have to do the proposal, right? So you wouldn't want to include an experimental design with 6 groups and 100 subjects per group because you're going to have a really hard time fitting that all in the space of the PERS. You would also want to tell your funding agency what materials, what equipment, what apparatus you will be using. So in my lab, this tends to be things like microscopes and cell quantification software, brain tissue processing equipment. But of course, it's going to look different depending on what your field is. Very importantly, you are going to want to include what your outcome measures are. So by that, I mean, if you're a psychology major, then you think of them as dependent variables. Otherwise, just think of them in terms of what are you going to be measuring? What is your output going to be? Are you going to, at the end of your project, have an estimate of total cell population in a region of the brain, for example? So this is what I mean by outcome measure. This is something that you want to be sure that you tell your funding agency. It's essentially a deliverable. So For PERS specifically, this is what they're asking you when they say, what tasks, state the specific tasks to be accomplished during the semester program. So by calling it tasks and asking you to state specifically what you're going to be doing, this is nice because they basically cover any field that you're in, no matter what department you're in or what your major is or what your research focus is. There's going to be some sort of procedure involved in order for you to get your data and to get your outcome measures. And so this is very general, but you are going to give them the specifics of how you're going to accomplish your research. And so again, just to give you a specific example, we're going back to Pierce's proposal. For his experiment that he is going to be doing, he had basically two factors going on. He had rats that were either sedentary or had access to exercise, and he had rats that were stressed or rats that were not stressed. So he's essentially got four groups here. And this was a study, incidentally, that had already been done. So if you're already starting to think, well, good Lord, he had to run rats and then, you know, count everything in one semester. No, he was working with tissue that had already been acquired. So he could move straight on to the analysis stage. So he has a situation in which he's already got brain tissue, and now it has to be treated so that the microglia can be visualized. And once we can visualize them, we can use computer-assisted or software-assisted computerized methods to count the number of microglia in the brain tissue sections that he processes. And so this would correspond to, this A corresponds to the groups in his experimental design. B, this corresponds to what he's actually going to be doing. He's going to be working with tissue, he's going to be working with microscope, he's going to be counting cells, and his outcome measure is number of primed microglia. So let's take about 2 minutes. Again, if you're working on, you know, a proposal in your mind, take a couple of minutes and jot down what your experimental groups would be, what your procedures will be, broad strokes, and importantly, what is your outcome measure going to be? So take about 2 minutes and do that. Okay, hopefully you've been able to jot down a few methods relevant thoughts and ideas. Let's go to the last part of this. This is one of the most challenging things, I think, is to predict the future, right? So again, this is not part of PERS. So if you're already freaking out and thinking 500 words, that's not much to, talk about my importance and my tasks and my goals. You're right, 500 words isn't very much. But if you can fit it in, I think it looks really impressive to show that you've totally thought through your potential results and what it will mean if you have your hypothesis, if you find that your hypothesis is upheld, if you find what you think you will find. And even better, what will you do and what will it mean if you don't find what you think that you will find? And so right now, actually, I'm reading proposals to the National Institutes of Health. They're called F31 proposals, and they're research proposals at the graduate level. So these are graduate students that have a mentor and they're trying to get funding for basically their dissertation project. It's very important, it's a very important part of their proposal to show that they have thought through alternative outcomes. And I think that this is something that, regardless of whether it's expected or not, it's really impressive if you can show that you have totally thought through what it will mean if you don't find what you think you are going to find. And so regardless of whether it's required for your research proposal, I think it's a really great thing to do. And I think it helps you to really see what's involved in your research and what the range of potential outcomes are. So getting back to the specific proposal that I've been outlining, Pierce's hypothesis was that exercise prior to stress will prevent microglial priming. And so, great, so what? If that hypothesis is upheld, it would mean that exercise protects the brain from future stress. Okay, great. Well, what is the real world importance of that, right? It, for one thing, supports the use of exercise as a stress management tool. A lot of people use exercise to manage their stress anyway. But if we can show that it specifically helps to reduce future stress-induced inflammation, then this suggests that exercise is really, in particular, a good way to manage stress for people who have inflammatory conditions like depression or irritable bowel disease, or people who are aging, because aging naturally increases inflammation. So these would be some of the big picture implications of our hypothesis being upheld. Right? If it's not upheld, an alternative outcome, and a horrible alternative outcome, would be that exercise increases primed microglia. So, well, what would that mean? Well, it could indicate that a physical stressor, because that's what exercise is, augments the effects of a psychological stressor. And so instead of detracting from the effects of the psychological stressor, maybe it makes it worse. I mean, that would be a horrible thing to find, but it's within the realm of possibility. Right? It could also suggest that maybe we really don't understand what prime microglia are. Maybe they're not really all about inflammation. Maybe they're actually helper cells as well, and there is some evidence for that. So just to kind of complete this whole picture, again, the PERS is 500 words, which isn't a lot, but I want to convince you that all this can be done, that you really can convincingly and compellingly lay out the importance of your research, the tasks that you're going to be doing in conducting your research, and the goals that you're going to meet in 500 words. And so this is Pierce's PERS proposal, and it actually is, I think I checked it, I think it's 396 words, so he could have said more, but he didn't need to. So he was apparently convincing and compelling because he was awarded a PERS. And so I have color-coded this. In purple is background, in red is basically methodology. In green is research question and or hypotheses. And so one thing you can see from this is it's not necessarily linear, right? You don't have to go importance and then tasks and then goals. You can kind of, mix and match them as it makes sense, as long as your output ends up being convincing and compelling. Okay, so you can sort of, as I said, mix and match, right? I also want to take this opportunity to assure you that there is no one right way to write a research proposal. Okay, so yours isn't going to look like this. You won't have X number of sentences of importance followed by X number of sentences of methods. This is just one way to do it and be successful. There are many others. So lastly, I want to say a few things about what you do after you submit your proposal. So writing a proposal, at least for me, maybe for some people it's really easy. For me, it's not. It takes me a long time, and it takes me a lot of thinking and a lot of processing. And I often feel exhausted when I hit the send button, but I also feel elated because I have gone through a lot of work to arrive at what is hopefully a convincing and compelling research proposal. And that is saying something. So even if I'm exhausted after I hit the send button, I feel pretty good. And I think it's worth congratulating yourself when you get the thing submitted. That is a huge deal. It doesn't even matter if it gets funded or not. Doesn't matter. You have gone through a great deal of work, and you should congratulate yourself for having done that. Because writing a research proposal is, in my opinion, not easy to do. So be sure to congratulate yourself for just getting the thing out the door. And the second part is even more important. If at first you don't succeed, try again. There is an art to writing successful proposals. It's not necessarily easy to be convincing and compelling. And so if you've written a PERS in the past and you haven't been successful, don't let that stop you from trying again. You will get better at this the more you do it. And so please don't be in the situation where your proposal doesn't get funded and you think, oh, this is just horrible, I'm never going to do this again. It is a little deflating to get a rejection, but it happens. It happens to everyone. And at the risk of introducing way too many platitudes into this presentation, if you fall off the horse, just get back on, try it again, and at some point you are going to be successful. Just keep at it and keep going with it. And that is the end of my presentation. So I promised I would leave a good amount of time at the end. And so we have plenty of time for questions.
I have a question. So when it comes to finding outcome measures for things that aren't STEM related, for example, you're observing behavior and your outcome measure might just be your observations of that behavior, how would you summarize that?
Well, since I am in a psychology department, I do know that there are ways of quantifying behavior. There's even ways of quantifying the content of writings, right? So if you were, for example, going through journal entries, there are ways of quantifying these things. This is what a mentor can help you with, because your mentor will be familiar with the ways that you can quantify whatever the outcome measure that you're interested in is.
Thank you.
If you are more comfortable putting a question in the chat, feel free to do that.
At any point in your proposal, do you need to state like explicitly what the funding would be used for and like why you need that, or is it just kind of assumed in your methodology like how you'll use it?
Great question. This does not apply to PERS, which is just a set amount, but there are many types of proposals where you have to include what's called a budget. And that means that, you know, it basically, you have categories like how much of the award would you spend on salaries? How much would you spend on maintenance and operations? How much would you spend on travel? And so for bigger awards, like let's say $10,000, $20,000 and up, you really have to be very specific in how you would spend the funds. But for a lot of internal proposals, since they are just a set amount, I know, or Brittany will, I'm sure, correct me if I'm wrong about this, but for PERS, that's not something that you have to do.
Right. For PERS, it's a set $1,000 scholarship awarded to students regardless.
For writing statements on like expected results and alternative outcomes, would it be, are you talking in a broader sense in terms of alternative outcomes, or more specific, like how you maybe like a statement or two of like how you'd write like your discussion section of like a manuscript?
Are you asking like how much space you should devote to this?
No, I'm asking, is it more specific to the literature in terms of talking about alternative outcomes, or are you talking about it more in a broader sense?
I'm not sure I understand the question, but let me see if I can try and make it clearer. Sometimes you will be required to state what exactly you would do. Like if you start to gather your data and, you know, not only is your hypothesis not being supported, it's in the wrong direction. Okay, well, would you stop and change things up? Would you start to view the whole thing differently and change your approach? That's one thing that you might, for some proposals, be required to answer. But if you're thinking more broadly, it could just be, you know, the implications of, if my hypothesis isn't supported, well, what does that mean? What's the big picture relevance of that? If that didn't answer your question,
That's it. Thank you.
Okay.
I had put my question in the chat, but I don't know if you saw it. My question was, how exactly do you go about finding a mentor?
Great question. So I would say that if you have already declared your major and you kind of know what general fields you would like to pursue research in, see what faculty are research active in your major and approach them. And by approach, obviously, I mean probably an email these days, since no one gets within 6 feet of each other. But I know Dr. McLeod has some specific efforts aimed at trying to help you all match yourselves with mentors who are willing to take on students and want to help students construct PERS and SURF applications.
Yeah, I would be happy to talk to students one-on-one about these kinds of questions, because it is a lot of the advice that I give is, you know, based on your interests and how to reach out to faculty. So if you'd like to reach out to me, I'll put my email here in the chat, and then we can have another conversation kind of separate from this call today.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
I'm going to answer a question in the chat that says, I work a lot with numbers and I loathe writing. How can I tell if my writing skill if my writing is good enough when I feel like I lack the writing skills? Well, would it help you to know that I think I lack great writing skills too? You know what? Sometimes stating things just very simply is the best thing to do, right? Don't feel like you have to have flowery sentences with fantastic thesaurus words. Sometimes just saying, this is what I'm going to do, this is why I'm going to do it. I mean, that can make reviewers' lives so much easier, and they might be like, thank you for just stating it simply, right? So I guess if you feel like your writing skills aren't great, maybe just give yourself more time to work on a proposal. So like if a deadline is December 1st, start working on that 500-word proposal now, right? Because it might just take you a little longer to get things where they're really clear.
I also have another question. Where's a good place to like, well, now I know because we have to revert a lot to online stuff. Where's a good place to start looking for good literature in terms of following our research proposals?
Great question. You know where, honestly, where I would start is a textbook, because a textbook will give you a very broad sense of a topic. And once you kind of feel comfortable with the basics, you'll be able to start asking more specific questions. And for my field, for neuroscience, the database that we always use is called PubMed. So it's the government's biomedical database. In other words, like any research that's been published that's relevant to biomedical fields is going to be in PubMed. And so we would search PubMed. But there are lots of databases out there that are discipline specific. And one thing that I do feel really good about is that our library, UH Library, has free access for you to many, many databases. And so I encourage you to explore that. And I bet that's probably even a topic for this research series that this presentation today is a part of. So you might want to look at that as well, what the library has to offer you. Here's a great question. The most common mistake you see in proposals. So I can speak just briefly to the proposals that I'm reviewing for the National Institutes of Health. I think the most common, and I wouldn't call it a mistake, it's just maybe something that the person didn't spend enough time on. That would be having a clear hypothesis that maps onto an experimental design and which maps onto a data analysis, a statistical analysis. And so these are dots that you have to make sure that you connect, right? You have to say what you think you're going to find, but then you also have to match an experiment to your hypothesis. In other words, you have to have an experiment that is going to allow you to test your hypothesis. And so making that link And I see in the chat, someone said the research librarians are very helpful. They really are. They really are, and they are very, very eager to help you. So definitely reach out to the research librarians if you're struggling to figure out, where do I find this literature? Copernio, I have heard of, I'm reading the chat. Copernio, I have not used it personally, but I've heard really good things about it. And I heard about it from a UH librarian. So check that out. How would I recommend we go about getting our research published? Again, your mentor. Your mentor is going to be able to guide you through that. So your mentor would not be where he or she is if they have not themselves already published. And so they understand the mechanics of constructing a manuscript for publication, sending it to a journal that would be appropriate for that publication. In other words, for me, if I'm going to publish a study on exercise in the brain, you know, I'm not going to send that to a chemistry journal, right? So you want to go with your mentor's judgment in terms of what would be a good journal for your specific research results. And so I think that's something that you will learn from the guidance of your mentor. My mentor says that I don't have time to get it published because it takes 3 years. Well, let's just take PERS as an example. It's a fairly short period of time, and some studies take a lot longer. And, you know, particularly if, for example, you're doing something like aging research and you have to wait for your rats or even your fruit flies to age, you know, that adds a lot of time onto your experiment. But, you know, sometimes I have published studies that incorporate some work that an undergraduate did, and maybe the undergraduate has already graduated and gone on to graduate school, but they're still happy to have that paper on their curriculum vitae, you know, even if they weren't still here at U of H when it got into publication channels. It does take a long time to publish, though, it's true. Anything else, folks? Don't be shy. There's no wrong questions in this kind of situation. Advice on how to contact professors from different colleges or areas of study. You know what? I think there's an art to contacting faculty. You have to sort of be convincing and compelling without having a multi-screen email. So if you can briefly indicate to the faculty member that you're interested in their work. So don't blast out an email to a dozen professors that says, hey, I want to do research. That will get you nowhere. You kind of have to do a little homework and look at the individual professor's research, see if it's something that you're interested in, and say, hey, I'm interested in your research on, people email me and say, I'm really interested in exercise effects on the brain. Do you have any research opportunities available? And so that's to the point, right? But also shows me that you know a little bit about what my research is and you share my interest in exercise. And so that might help you to establish a connection with that person, whereas a mass email will not. Don't do that. So I guess in short, my message is be personal in that, show that you've actually done some work on understanding what that person's research is about, but don't go on and on and on in a really long email. And if they're interested and they have an opportunity available, they will get back to you. Would neuro research at UH be more NSM or psych? You know what? We don't have a neuroscience department at U of H. We have a lot of faculty who do work with the brain. They tend to be split between psychology, pharmacology, engineering, and to some extent the biology and biochemistry. So it takes a little bit of legwork if you're interested in neuroscience, because we are kind of split among multiple departments, but trust me, we are here. And it probably doesn't matter. For example, if you're a biology major, there's nothing that says you can't work with a psychology professor. Should we highlight our skills as well? Yes. If you have research skills already, that is a good thing to mention. I just don't want to give you the idea that you have to already have research experience before you ask someone if you can do research with them, because you got to start somewhere, right? So yes, if you already have pre-existing skills, definitely let the person know that, but just don't feel like that's a prerequisite and a deal breaker if you don't already have skills. How can I tell if my proposal gets too technical? How can I make my writing seem less like crazy ramblings? Get your friends and family to read your proposal, because if it is too technical for them, it's too technical for a reviewer, right? You want to try and write for a very broad audience. The more easily understandable you can make your research ideas and proposals, the more likely you are to get someone to give you money to do it, right? So I think if a non-scientist can read your proposal and understand it, you can be pretty well assured that it is not too technical and it is not crazy rambling. Okay, great question. Interested in research on psychedelic drugs, specifically psilocybin and its use for treatment-resistant depression. Right, so actually, I'm going to use Pierce as an example again. That is exactly what Pierce wanted to do in my lab. And so I had to break it to him that, yeah, unfortunately, the psychedelic drugs are Schedule 1, which means you have to have a very specific drug license to work with them, and that I do not have that license. And so, yeah, if you really are interested in something like that, you may be better off trying to find someone in the medical center who works with those drugs already, because there are certain there are certain topics that you might just be out of luck with because no one at the university does exactly what you're interested in. So could you take a step back like Pierce did and say, well, okay, I'm still interested in stress, and find something else that you're still interested in doing and you would still feel fulfilled if you did a project on that. Could I go briefly into my own research? Can't you just find a mentor that has that medical license? It's not a medical license, actually, it's a drug license. It's a license from the DEA to work with what are called Schedule I substances. And yes, you could find a mentor that has that that DEA license, but you would also want someone who works with the drug that you are interested in, because just because someone works with a drug like cocaine doesn't mean they have any expertise in working with something like psilocybin. So you would probably really want someone that not only has that license, but has experience working with the drug that you're interested in. For my own research, my basic interest is exercise effects on the brain, specifically using exercise as a tool to heal the damaged brain. So my my graduate work, the work I did to get my PhD was on brain damage and recovery of function. And so exercise is a great way to help the damaged brain to recover. And so currently my lab is funded to look at exercise as a treatment for the damage done to the brain by binge alcohol. For the question, does your mentor have to be at U of H? I believe so for a PERS, but just to do research in general, no. You could find someone in the medical center. I know UH students who have done that. So yeah, if there's someone who does exactly what you're interested in and they're at an institution in the medical center, don't let that stop you.
All right, I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Thank you so much, Dr. Leasure, for being here today, presenting this to our students. I can tell that it's been so helpful for them, which there was never a doubt. I knew this was something that our students needed, and I knew that you would be a wonderful person to share this with the students. So thank you.
Thank you, it was my pleasure.
And to the students, if you have questions, please let me know. And I can send those along to Dr. Leasure, or if she's comfortable with you reaching out to her directly, that can be done too. The recording of this meeting will be posted on our YouTube channel, which I shared in the chat here earlier, but I can send that out again later. And know that we're here to help you as you figure out how to put together research proposals and think about what types of programs you might be most competitive for. So thank you all for being here.
And I just put my email in the chat. So yes, absolutely. If I can help you with a question around a research proposal, I will do my best.